We are habitually connected to trying to treat symptoms, not problems. We grow under pressure. We do not grow in environments where we are comfortable. Be impeccable with your work. Seek to understand, but question everything.
The essence is all comes back to self-awareness.
It is one of the quickest ways to level up as a human. Instead of telling people what to do, let's show them what to do and create a real education. With social media, I have an opportunity to impact millions of lives.
Give me some of the big issues.
All the topics that we should be talking about so that we can understand each other, we don't. So conflict resolution is in our society. There are really three components to stabilize long-term relationship. The number one piece is
the obvious question for me, because I've seen a lot of your content online, and particularly, we see lots of people talking about self-development these days, but what I like particularly about your stuff is you seem to have quite a wide and deep knowledge across lots of different modalities, and there seems to be quite a lot of substance behind what you're saying, and you can seem to sort of dip into lots of different areas. I'm kind of seeing you sometimes, it feels like you're talking to a group or you're doing a workshop. Maybe you're just talking to the camera to make content. But I'm kind of interested, like there's you and you built Fenix Consulting Group around you. As I understand it, it originally was more of sales, and now you've sort of gone more into sort of leadership and culture stuff. I'm just interested, like, what is your business and business model at the moment? What does it segment into? Obviously, the social media stuff is some marketing and podcasts and awareness, but what services do you guys offer basically?
It all kind of ties together. That's I guess story arc, but I started Fenix coming out of the 2008 great financial crisis that massively impacted the world, to be fair. I don't know how it was felt in South Africa, but here in the United States, it was brutal. Then I started my business coming out of that, which is, fun in and of itself. And part of the reason why I named it Fenix. But my first gig, I was doing a lot of like private consulting and advising, taking on advising roles, but I had an opportunity to work with AT&T, which, not a bad company to get partnered with early in your career as a consultant. And they were in the middle of a huge technological transition. They were moving from their legacy lines, as they call them, over to a new technology called fiber optic, which is now fairly ubiquitous. But at the time, it was a very big deal for them, and they were trying to figure out how to get their customers effectively transitioned. And they had watched their biggest competitor, Verizon, fail pretty miserably at it from an adoption standpoint, because the belief was, well, if we offer it, everybody's going to want it. We don't really have to market too badly. They'll just call in. We'll send them a little notification in the mail with their bill. Hey, fiber optics available in your area, call us, we'll get it set up. Didn't go very well. So AT&T was like, well, we got to take a different approach here. We need pretty good market penetration. So I was part of the team that helped them do that. And we did a phenomenal job, if I might say so.
That's on the sales side, right?
That was early days. And I was literally building, again, going back to a fundamental principle. I'm not interested in telling people what to do as much as I am showing people what to do. And so I was very reluctant to get into social media because I was too busy in an analog world, developing and growing people, building teams, building my business. It was only because of COVID that I took it seriously. And it was only because a chunk of my business was on standby, as we really couldn't interface with our customers during COVID. So I was like, well, I got some downtime. I was running a lot of workshops. I was doing a lot of training and development. I was like, why don't we start recording this and we'll put it out there. And
sorry, just to jump in, I think that definitely comes across in what you do. There's a lot of people, I think, who are sort of social first to sort of try and get clients to then do something in the real world. But it just felt like you're kind of recording what you were doing in the real world anyway, right? And I think that's where the substance comes from.
Well, I would say this. As a whole, what I am sharing is integrated work that is decades of experience behind it. I shouldn't say, there is I would say easily 95% of the content we're putting out there is in front of a live audience, and it is catered to the live audience, not social media. which is why sometimes context gets lost. Sometimes my videos are offensive to people because they're like in a 30 to 60 second clip, they're not getting the whole context. And we're like, fuck. So then we started doing YouTube long form, which I still need to get much better at, but it's just so people, if they're like, hey, if you're really interested in this topic, here's the whole conversation, you can get the context. Because 30, 60 second clips, very often context is lost. Now, for those who can hear, understand the truth that's being spoken, they still get it, but it can be a little bit tricky. But yeah, I was an analog guy first. I didn't want to get into social media. I actually loathed social media for a very long time. And I just thought it was fairly petty. Now I realize the error in my thought process in that with social media, I have an opportunity to impact millions of lives, which I think we're seeing 30 million views a month right now, which is like, okay, well, core to my mission is that. So I'm like, okay, in the analog world, I was mostly dealing with addition and some multiplication. In social media world, I'm the digital world, I am absolutely in geometric impact. So it's aligned with my vision. I just had to get behind it. And it took me a while. I was pretty reluctant. A lot of people were like, why aren't you on social media? I'm like, because I'm busy building my business and dealing with real people. There wasn't much for it. We primarily did sales. And then 2016, 2017, we became more omni-channel, kind of an evolution, more of an omni-channel approach to sales. And we got into bi-directional marketing, which is pretty incredible. And then late teens, early 20s, started getting into more like cultural transitions, hiring key people. We got into more of the recruiting game because we started looking at some of the products of our business. We had an incredibly high tenure retention in our business. We've been rated best places to work in Orange County, I think 10 years in a row, something like that, which Orange County that's fairly tough to do in Southern California. And so we started looking at, well, why? What are the principles and the values we're running our business by that create this? And certainly it's not to suggest that everybody who's worked for Fenix has loved us. We have a pretty particular flavor of culture that you may not enjoy, but we do our best job of hiring into that correctly and setting the right expectation. But as a result, kind of more people will come like, hey, I want that in my culture, or how do I get that in my culture? How do I find these kinds of people? And that's where the content comes in. Is I spend almost 15, it's like 14 and change, but basically 15% of our payroll cost is in the investment and the development of our people. Again, going back to, instead of telling people what to do, let's show them what to do and create a real education. I am not a big fan of academia right now. I think it's just a fraction of what it used to be. I don't think it's training and developing people for the real world. And there's probably multiple reasons for it, including the world is changing so quick. Academia is having a hard time keeping up. But it just, I see it. I see the next generation coming into the workforce, and they are so underdeveloped. It's insane. And so,
in what sense? Sort of interpersonal skills?
I mean, I literally at this point, it's like it's in all senses, and I wish I was exaggerating. Certainly, soft skills very often are missing. I'm speaking in generalities. Of course, there are obviously exceptions, and there are great people. But when you follow their journey, it was almost despite the system, not because of the system. So it's like there are great people that are coming up. There always is. But when you look at the swath of humanity right now that is being developed in our current system, nobody's arguing that they're better prepared for the real world than they've ever been. It's quite the opposite. Now we may argue about why, how much did COVID have an impact? What's going on in the world, inflation, all the stories that we want to say. And I'm like, well, great. We could point the finger every direction you want if that's useful to you. But at the end of the day, we're failing an entire generation of people. So again, recurring theme here. My goal isn't to tell people, it's to show people. And so we use our business management training program as a platform to develop and train young business people into business leaders. So the content that everybody's seeing on social media is two teams of people from all over the country. And it ranges from some rooms have
business teams, companies you go into and they send their teams to you, right?
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of it, I would say, is probably 60% of it is internal. So those are my internal employees getting content like that. And that's because for us, people development is a big part of what we do. And so I have a set of organizing principles I run my business from. And one of them is happy people are growing people. Growing people tend to be loyal people. Not always. Again, there's exceptions to everything, but so that's really the goal. And so what has become, we've had a pretty good impact just in the last 3 years on social media, which is crazy to think it's been that long. It feels like it hasn't been that long, but has been 15 years of work, right? So I am this coming year, we're going to be doing more content that is platform facing, meaning it's for my digital audience, and it will be obvious because I'll be facing the camera. We are going to start doing more of that kind of content, but that's kind of the evolution of how we got to where we are. I don't know if there's holes
And I
in
mean,
it.
how did you, because you sound very knowledgeable, like I said at the beginning, from lots of different areas of psychology and personal development and philosophy. Like your background's in sales, like where did a lot of this like human behavior stuff come from?
My background is lifetimes of work, brother. And it's not sales. Sales is just a fantastic way to meet people. Sales is sports for adults. And the way the human design works, we grow under pressure. And it's genius. It's a genius design element, but we grow under pressure. We do not grow in environments where we are comfortable. Just it's not how humans were created. There are very few places where you get a clear scorecard and clear data to drive behavior. In the United States right now, I would say sports is one of them. It's still one of the places where you can develop as a human being. It's not guaranteed, but there's a shot if you played certainly collegiate sports. But even if you got into starting on high school teams, you probably learned something about working as a team and collaboration. And there's a clear scorecard, right? There's a drive. Maybe some parts of academia, but I don't want to bet on that one. The military's changed a ton. I grew up in a military family, and like my 3 generations of military, at least the males in my family are in the military. Beyond that, business is one of the other places you can win and have a clear scorecard for what winning looks like. So I use sales as a modality. I'm not super passionate about sales. I am super passionate about developing people, and sales is a fantastic platform to drive behavior because you are interacting with other humans all day long, one way or the other. And that interface gives you constant feedback on how you're showing up. It is one of the quickest ways to level up as a human versus staying in front of a screen all day, much harder to do.
And so and you can see result, there's tangible results on the sales as long as to an extent the product or the script is working, right?
Yep.
That's interesting. And so what do you come on, give me some of the big issues. What are you seeing a lot? Why aren't these teams working? What tends to be the issues that you have to tackle?
I'm a student for life. I'm obsessed with learning. To this day, I spend easily 20% of my waking hours growing and learning. And so I am able to take a multidisciplinary approach. One, because I don't want to get stuck in a particular paradigm of seeing the world, right? When you do that, there's an opportunity cost related to that. In the scientific community, we know if somebody doesn't come up with statistically a new theorem by the time they're 35, they most likely won't, because your brain begins to crystallize into seeing the world a very particular way. Now, that doesn't have to be that way. It just tends to be what humans do. And so one of the ways you stave that off is always staying curious, always learning, and put truth before right and wrong and before your ideologies and your story of self. That's very hard to do. Humans don't really do that well for a number of reasons. And again, from a design element, it somewhat makes sense. But I am far more interested in truth than I am right and wrong. I'm far more interested in truth than I am in my ideologies or my identity, which is why I say pretty regularly now, I reserve the right to change my mind. And if I'm presented with information that corrects something that I believed, and I have no problem doing that because my identity isn't tied to a story of self and other that keeps me stuck in a belief system. And that's more what I'm trying to teach. Now, to your question, and that as a result, Charlie, that comes across as a very multidisciplinary approach to teaching. And I focus on what I call the big three, because 80% of the pain in people's life comes down to the big three, which is, and I have coaching clients that 2 of them run $500 million companies. And we're still talking about the same shit that I'm talking to 25-year-old kids about. It's just usually some area of your life, if you don't address it, ends up dealing with you. Or I say it this way, that which you don't deal with ends up dealing with you. So the big three are wealth, health, and relationships. And most of the pain in people's lives is in one of those three areas. And as you get older, it can kind of have a cascading effect where you begin to realize, I way over indexed on this area at the cost of this. So a lot of times I'll run into guys that have more money than God, but their relationships suck and they're not happy with their bodies. So then they're like, how the fuck do I fix this? Well, the good news is money gives you options, which is why I usually index on finances first, because money buys you time to figure everything else out. Money is a store of energy and time, which is fantastic if you know how to use it. So I focus on the big three as a result. And so that's why it comes across as like, wow, you're venturing many different topics. Well, yeah, because my clients, the human experience, we love to believe is incredibly unique. Humans are just having a human experience and they're not incredibly unique. It's like, I know everybody wants their illusion of specialness, but it's just humans being human. So I focus on those things. Now, to your question about dysfunctional teams, the first framework I would use there, and there's certainly layers to this, but the first framework is to have a healthy culture, to have a healthy team or a healthy partnership, whether this is a personal relationship like a marriage or some kind of intimate partnership, or a family partnership or a business partnership. There are really three components that have to be in place to stabilize long-term relationship. The number one piece is vision. There has to be shared vision, but we have to be working towards the same things. And you'll see this in relationships where that isn't present. They're in many cases unconsciously pushing against each other or pulling away from each other because they're seeking different things, right? So we have to have a shared vision. So that's the first thing. If I'm doing cultural transitions or working with a team to get them aligned, it's like, well, do we have a clear vision, a clear outcome? Do we know what winning looks like as a team? Are we clear on what we're trying to accomplish? Number one is vision. Number two is values. This matters massively. There's an old adage that still gets passed around that opposites attract. It's not actually true. Opposites in personality can be useful and can add some spice and fire. But if there is opposites in values, that is long-term lots of pain. And so you could have two people, that just make something up quickly, who have a shared vision. We both want to be financially free. One wants to do it ethically and legally. The other one is, I don't give a fuck how I do it, right? Well, they have the same vision. They just have different values on how to get there. That's going to be pain. And you can see this with an organization. So number two is having shared values. And then number three is having a way that we deal with conflict, shared conflict resolution. So we're given tools to deal with conflict. Now, this one is incredibly important in a society, Western society, that pervasively says we don't talk about things like sex, politics, religion, all the topics that we should be talking about so that we can understand each other. We don't. So conflict resolution is fucked in our society because as a whole, we've been taught to avoid those topics, not actually have constructive criticism and conversation around it. So it's pretty balls, at least in the States. Maybe it's different in South Africa a bit. And so as a result, we ghost each other, whether it's ghosting is a term that showed up about 10 years ago, and it's not related to just personal relationships. We see it in business now too. And it doesn't matter whether you're fucking Google or McDonald's, you're dealing with ghosting, which is somebody just abandons a position and doesn't say anything because they don't want to deal with real conversation and get to the bottom of things. And so I spend a lot of time on those three things first. There's certainly other things we could talk about, abandoning or negligent in your position or your responsibilities or your roles and how that shows up in leadership. But I'm a first things first person when it comes to coaching and developing. And we got to get our principles right. We got to get our foundation right. Then we can work on the other pieces.
I mean, I love all of that. And I can see how, from pattern recognition of so many people, like you said, humans are actually, we all think we're very different. We're all very more similar than we think, right? And, if you synthesizing everything down to those three pillars, I have no doubt that those buckets are the real areas that you need to sort of go into to sort of kick off that change. And I mean, some of the things you said there on the, relationship thing. I remember I went to a Tony Robbins event once, and I remember writing down that to have a successful relationship, you've got to have two things. You've got to have chemistry and compatibility. And it's just so freaking makes so much sense. How many people have the chemistry alone and there's fireworks and it's great, and then they get married and there's like, hang on, we both want different things. One person's into this, one person wants that, one person wants to save money, another one wants to show off, another person doesn't, another person wants to go on camping trips, another one wants to go to have the cocktail in Mykonos. It's crazy, isn't it? And that compatibility just moves people apart. So also that vision and taking people along the way with you, and people buying into that. I went through a phase where I geeked out on a lot of the sports coaches and how they build their teams and the psychology behind it. And one of my favorite ones is Clive Woodward's book, who was the England rugby team coach and won the World Cup. And he talks about how day one in the job, he sat everyone in the room and was like, guys, we need to win the World Cup in 4 years. How are we going to figure it out? How are we going to do it together? And he helped the team from the grassroots bottom up figure out, okay, what are the rules we're going to live by? Like, how are we going to get there? Obviously, he led and pushed and changed and iterated, and he had the last say. But it was like it was the opposite to that top-down, guys do this. And everyone's like, well, what the fuck? You're not even going to listen to what we think? So I really liked that. And it's something that I always stuck in my mind. And yeah, the other one is that ability. I agree with you in the workplace and even socially nowadays. We all have to kind of, to your point earlier, our opinions have to be linked to our identity and therefore our self-worth. And everything has to be so binary. It's like Trump, Biden, Brexit, non-Brexit, all of these issues. And there's an inability to be able to communicate and respect that, we might not be right, or everyone holds different opinions, and people can give meaning to different things and belief to different things, and those things can change. And holding that loose sense of oneself a little bit, and be open to, like, we can disagree, but appreciate each other at the same time. And I think that goes to that same adage of being able to have those conversations, particularly in the workplace, and be like, look, I'm going to tell you what I really think about you, because this isn't good, even though you're my superior or whatever, because it's not, don't take this personally. It's because I care about you and I care about the greater good of the company, and creating that environment for us to be able to be like that. And I think that it cuts across the social and business. So I freaking love those three points. And, I couldn't agree with it more.
I would say, as a whole, for your listeners, sometimes it's hard to get on my shorts, but I try to teach in a way in which you can take the underlying principle that I'm sharing and back test it. So for instance, colossal failures are business partnerships that fell apart, or personal relationships that fell apart. Can you back test what I'm saying and see how it applied? Failure, like the number one cause of divorce in the United States is irreconcilable differences, which usually comes from an inability to resolve conflict. Number one. So you can see it. Like, I try to teach in a way in which you can apply the principle backwards and go, oh, that fits. Now, to your point earlier, one, we asymptotically approach perfection, or asymptotically approach truth. And there, on the way to the uppercase truths, there is generally multiple perspectives depending on where you're sitting to see something. And so one has to operate with a certain level of humility and understanding that there are multiple ways to see something. Eventually you arrive at the same conclusions, though, I've noticed more often than not. And so being patient in that process based on somebody's perspective and how they grew up and what they've gone through. One of the kind of knee-jerk ways that we learn, and I guess it has served humanity for long enough that it makes sense, but it also holds us back, is to assume that our personal experience is the general rule. No, your personal experience is your subjective world. And that's hard for a lot of people to get their head around or their heart around and want to surrender, because our story of self is such an incredibly important part of our makeup and how we interface in this world.
But Sebastian, I mean, it kind of links nicely to what you were talking about earlier around having that fixed identity versus a growth growth identity mindset. This is me, this is my opinions, this is how I am, this is, if you disagree with me, that's against, who I am and what I believe in and my self-worth or whatever. You've managed to adopt a growth mindset, so you're not that fused to your identity, and that can change over time, etc. Like, how do you open up people's eyes and minds to the fact that they might have a fixed mindset, a fixed identity, and help them, unshackle from that and move to more of a growth identity, growth mindset?
It's a beautiful question, and this is literally my entire reason for being on this rock, the planet as it is. My whole first book is on personal awareness, is on self-awareness and identity, which is why this topic is such a. I would say I'm writing the book because this topic is so important to me. But 96% of people polled. I believe it was an 8-year study. 96% of people polled believed that they were self-aware. And the actual numbers are less than 15% of people are actually self-aware. Right? So this is, as a consultant, one of my, again, first principle thinking, like, what is the one thing that if we solve for, solves for the most other things? Where am I going to get most bang for my buck?
So what would be the one, I know I'm interjecting here, but what would be an obvious question if someone already thinks they are self-aware, but they're actually not?
There's two aspects to self-awareness, but I would say this. There's an old saying in the consciousness community that I think is a fair place to show up, which is, those who are awake do not judge those who are asleep. So we don't spend a lot of time pointing to other people's egos, because only the ego in us can see the ego in someone else. Once you surrender ego in yourself, there's nothing to see in the other. So that's really the work, which is why, to me, personal development and personal growth is the answer. And it starts with self-awareness. There are two aspects to self-awareness. One is internal self-awareness. So you're aware of your emotional condition. You're aware of how you are showing up in the world emotionally. You're aware of other people's impact on your emotional condition, your stories, your beliefs, your family history on your worldview, right? You're able to objectively see where these things come from. And that's one. And leading indicator that is lacking is statements that kind of follow this frame. Well, that's just the way I am. That's just my personality. That's the way I was raised. That's how we do it in my country. That's how it is in my culture. That's how my teacher taught me. That's what I learned in school. Any phrase in which you are borrowing from other to represent your reasoning is probably an indication of a lack of awareness. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean what you believe is wrong, faulty, or whatever other fucking label we want to put on it. It just means you are unconscious of the reasoning, which to me isn't a whole lot better, because there's an old saying, he who's good with a hammer sees everything as a nail. If you don't know why you believe something, you inevitably will use it in inopportune times, right? You'll misapply the belief system because it's an unconscious belief system. Okay. So the other part of awareness is your awareness of how you are impacting your environment, your awareness of how you are showing up in the environment, your awareness of your emotional state on other people, your words on other people, and being able to read a room. People who are great at sales, great at negotiation, great with people tend to be good at outward awareness, not always necessarily indicative of somebody who's inwardly aware. But pure self-awareness is that you are inwardly aware and you are outwardly aware. You're aware of your experience, how you're experiencing the world, and you're aware of how the world is experiencing you, put simply. And that's very few people. Now, the frames, to your original question around consciousness framing, how would I know? If you are using phrases, generally the lowest level of consciousness is phrases that follow to me phrasing. Life is happening to me. I'm at the effects of life. So if I hear somebody using that kind of framing, they're generally very unaware. And anyway, if you're negged out or emotional, no matter how much of an enlightened guru you may think you are, you can drop into to me thinking. You just have the awareness to go, oh shit, I'm hanging out in to me. That doesn't serve me. And you bounce out of it. Somebody with no awareness is stuck there and they're like a broken record. Well, what does that look like? That's like going home for the holidays and sitting down with the family and everybody's having the same fucking conversation they've had every year for the last 10 years. They may even be sitting in the same seats every year talking about the same fucking shit. And you're like, what? How is that? How are we on repeat? Because there's no awareness. It's total programming, right? And it's to me consciousness. Life is happening to me. I am at the effects of life. That is somebody who is totally locked down. My goal is simply to help transition 10% of the world's population, 1 in 10 is all it's going to take, from to me to for me. Right? And that's just the baby step. But that baby step opens up the crack of light that has the cascading effect to everything else. And for people taking notes or like complete lists, it's to me, for me, by me, and then through me or with me. So life is happening to me, totally locked up, no consciousness. Life is happening for me. There's a crack of light. How can I learn? How can I change? That's growth mindset. Life is happening by me. That is the vision of creator, manifester. And there's an old saying, everyone is writing their own story. It's just generally successful people that are willing to admit it. And it's true. That's by me consciousness. Life is happening by me. I am creating my life. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that everything that happens to you is by your creation or that you wanted it to happen. It means that you have the one capacity you have is how you respond to what is happening to you. Viktor Frankl wrote a fantastic book, Man's Search for Meaning. He came out of the Holocaust, literally lost everything you could imagine. And his one conclusion was, although man can take everything from me, less my ability to respond, how I respond to what is happening to me. And so that is a fundamental belief system of somebody who's moving through levels of consciousness. So by me, and then finally in a surrendered state, and you would see mostly your monks and your kind of people that are just here to be, hang out in co-creation, which is life is happening with me or through me. I'm simply co-designing or co-creating in this world.
I couldn't agree with you more. My book that I've just finished writing, which I'm excited about, the essence is all comes back to self-awareness. And that was why I was so interested to hear from you, how do you get people into that and maybe understand. And so a good follow-on question for you, going back to that idea of how important communication is, whether it's a husband and wife, or you're in the team at work, or you're in that sports team, and the adage of, look, the place where you want to get to is open, honest communication. So everyone knows what's going on. Are we really aligned? Are we really on the same page? And as I understand it, it does require a lot of truth and vulnerability and openness and some courage to start asking oneself some questions about oneself, and then sharing, how that makes you feel with the other person. And that's kind of like, how do we create conditions for people to become more self-aware, but in addition to that, conditions to be open and vulnerable towards each other and to oneself. I suppose it's in and of the same thing, right?
Yeah, which is creating the conditions that very often lead the front door to self-awareness. Many people take the back door, which I don't think is necessary, but it does seem to be prevalent, which is pain. And again, if you look at the human design element, it's easy to understand how the human psyche was created to, I would say, over-index on pain and fear as a driver. If your goal with a species was to drive it to consciousness, it would have to live long enough, exist long enough to get there. And if your driver was pleasure and comfort, it would die long before it became conscious, right? So I don't necessarily hate on the fact that it's fear and pain, though I don't enjoy fear or pain as a driver, mostly because I think we are getting to a point in human consciousness where we can start to move away from fear and pain as the driver and move into higher levels of consciousness that are going to be more driven by joy, bliss, connection, community, love, all the woo-woo terms that there's still groups of people that are like, because I get it. Like if you look at history, pain and fear have driven so many of our decisions. By the way, many of our poorest decisions come from pain and fear as well, but we learn from them. And so here we are. So people change. The back door is we change through immense amount of pain. And that's very often when I get the call, is when somebody has all the things they thought would make them feel good and they don't. It's like, hey, like I don't feel fulfilled by US standards or by Western culture standards. I'm a success, but I'm broken on the inside. Like, all right, well, let's talk about that. Let's get real about who we actually are. And so for me, one of my favorite books to recommend is Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, or the Fifth Agreement. He's got quite a few now, but the first one, The Four A's, I think is a great place to start, foundational place to start in learning how to be candid, open, and honest, right? Be impeccable with your word, number one. Don't take things personal. Number two, don't make assumptions. Number three, and then focus on always doing your best. Those are very simple things that I think anyone can get behind, but if you start applying those to your life, you will be amazed at how differently you show up in time. Just learn to be integrous with your word. So I work very hard to craft sentences that are as accurate as they possibly can be. Sometimes I will use energy instead of words to craft that same truth, because sometimes energy is the more effective way to reach people, but the integrity of your word is important. So we know, and this is there was a study that came out a few years ago that just made its way into the public, that authenticity is the strongest energetic expression in the human experience. And some people were shocked to hear that authenticity showed up registered higher than love. I would offer the reason for that is the most powerful driver of love is authenticity. So when you are living your purest expression, it is authentically you. So for me, my four driving values that drive my decisions in the world, number one is truth and our pursuit of it, full well knowing in humility. We may never get to many of the capital T truths, but we can at least asymptotically approach it, which means very often in life, we're simply surrendering a lowercase truth for a better lowercase truth. And we know it's better, or we could say more beneficial, because of the fruit it is yielding in our life. Right? And that's fundamentally for me, when I'm looking at somebody, I pay very little attention to their words and far more about the fruit in their life. Right? If what you believe is bringing you peace, love, and joy, I'm listening. If what you believe is giving you the result you want everyone else to have, I'm listening. But how often do we see very angry, bitter people telling the world what they should believe?
Yeah.
I'd be
I
hesitant.
think it's such. I like that one. You know, you're looking beyond the word and seeing what fruits of the labor or the ways of being is manifesting in someone's life. I mean, I can relate a lot to that. I had it all the wrong way around, and after a lot of work, started to get it a lot more the right way around, and started being open and honest with myself, and more vulnerable, and living more of a authentic, I know these are all mumbo jumbo words, but a life congruent with myself, the life that made me feel like less tense and more at ease and more open, and relationships and work and how I feel on a day-to-day basis. And it's kind of like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You feel better,
Yeah.
you do better, you think better, you make better decisions, all of that good stuff. I love that saying. I think it was Jim Carrey where he goes, I wish everyone's dreams would come true, because then they'd realize that wasn't the thing.
I say something similar in that I look at addiction as an attempt at a solution. And some addictions, human addictions, seem to be less acceptable than others. But if we are real, a lot of humans operate from addiction, right? Which is simply an attempt at a solution. And the easiest way to drop that addiction is to be absolutely certain it's not the answer. And so very often, I find it's more effective to not try to talk somebody out of the behavior, but to create space for them to get very clear that it isn't the answer. And then the addiction
Walk
drops
me through
itself.
that. Give me an example.
Well, a brutal example, and I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on the internet, but a brutal example is, instead of trying to talk somebody out of alcoholism, as an example, give them the freedom to consume as much as they frickin' want without judgment. Now, that is saying that for so many people would be like, what? You're out of your fucking mind. And I get it. I get why, right? You went through AA, or you're stuck in that process, or you know somebody who has, and I do and have, people who are addicted to narcotics and alcohol. It's like, what are you talking about? The immense amount of suffering the family would have to go through to see that, the amount of suffering they would go through. Oh yeah, you're totally right. But one way or the other, in this life or the next, they will find out very clearly it wasn't the answer they thought it was. So very often, when do you see people change? When they are absolutely certain it isn't the answer they thought it was. So for me, instead of trying to talk people out of learning that lesson, I'm far more interested in instigating the lesson. Oh, figure that out. Napoleon said it this way. It was and there's a principle here. I use the word enemy lightly, but this was his quote. He said, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. You could look at your ego, maybe not as your enemy, but an adversary you're working against. So in my experience, when people want to double down on their emotional story of how the world should be, it's much easier to create space for them to experience their story of the world they think they're creating, so that they're absolutely certain it isn't creating what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes to that coaching adage of like, help the person kind of needs to realize it for themselves rather than you telling them, right? So if you're pulling them back before they've even got to the crevasse, then
there's a principle there, and it shows up a lot of different ways. It's, with children, as another example to kind of hit it from a different angle, how often do we try to teach children to give before they've ever learned to receive? You know how confusing that is for a child? Well, we're telling them to share and to give things before they've ever experienced true ownership of something. You can't give something that you've never personally received, right? So we get these things asked backwards. One of the reasons we get them asked backwards is we are habitually connected to trying to treat symptoms, not problems. And so we are far more interested in hiding the symptoms of problems than dealing with the actual problem. And it's not just in the medical community, although it has made a lot of money for the pharmaceutical world. It's not just in that world, right? It's easier to hide symptoms than it is to treat problems. So a lot of our coaching, our behavior, even our therapists, the whole framing isn't actually to deal with the problem. It's to treat the symptom, to hide the problem. And also is very profitable, because if you never deal with the problem, the person has to keep coming back and back and back and back and back and back to keep mitigating the symptom. That's not freedom. So as I was saying earlier, my four core values in order: truth is number one. To me, the other side of the coin from truth is love. I don't think you can get to pure expression of love without truth. In fact, in one way, I would say they are one and the same. But truth, love, freedom, those three now give you the essential ingredient for community. Without truth, love, and freedom, very hard to have healthy community, in my opinion. So both my content, my approach, my framing is designed around that. And then from there, we get into radical honesty, right? Going back to what you're saying about how do we communicate more clearly? Honesty, awareness, responsibility. So my team is cutting up things that I've said over the years and dropping them into kind of different various quotes, as I guess the algorithm appreciates varying kinds of content. I don't know. My team takes care of it. That's not my world. But one of them, and some conversation around it, was always trust your gut, right? Essentially was the message. Like, you can sort it out later. Some people, what if my gut's wrong? It may very well be. Not that I would ever say your gut is wrong, but you may not actually know what your intuition is. You may have muted it for so long and it's such a mess that you're like, fuck, I don't even. So then you make a decision. You're like, I shouldn't have trusted my gut. Well, that wasn't your gut. But the only way you're going to learn that is by making those decisions. So trusting your gut doesn't make you impervious from pain. It doesn't make you impervious from the consequences. It is, all it does is create a framework for you to begin to understand who you really are. But that is much better. And here's the reasoning behind it. It is a much, in the short term, it is a much easier world to control everyone. And you see throughout human society this kind of pervasive, sometimes it takes time, but this pervasive desire to control behavior as the way to rule, reign, and protect. The United States was predicated on freedom 236 years ago. I read George Washington's farewell address every freaking year on July 4th, and I hope the whole world does, because he was a genius and a prophet as he explained, hey, here's the issue. Here's what we're going to run into if we move away from this, or just the challenges of freedom. Here's the ugly truth with freedom. Freedom is fucking messy. When people are free, truly free, they are free to fuck it up. And we don't generally like that, which is why we try to control. So I don't know how it is in South Africa, but the United States has so many dumbass laws that are simply designed to protect stupid. It is literally designed to control people from killing themselves, and in all the different ways they could do it. Right? Well, that's a problem for so many reasons. Freedom is messy. Freedom gives people the opportunity to fuck it up, but it also is the only place, the most effective place to learn.
It goes to that adage that what's the politician's biggest fear? It's social unrest, right? And so that there needs to be these restrictions and controls, and everyone can't just run around and do whatever they want in anarchy. But I just want to bring this back to this idea of truth and people speaking their truth, Seb. I like that idea as a mental model to think about how we're wired to be social animals. We're wired to get along from our ancestry, from back in the caveman days. We wanted to get along with people, because if we said the wrong thing and everyone hated us, we might get stabbed in the back in our cave at night, right? The tribe comes and takes you out. Now,
yep.
And that sort of come through evolution. So, we all want to kind of get along. We don't want to know the truth, and we don't want to tell the other person the truth. We all want to get along. And so what I liked about what you said around some of the system and some therapy and psychology cannot necessarily get to the root of the problem. It's just trying to deal with a symptom, and particularly kind of A-type men going to see therapists, they can easily kind of manipulate the situation, and maybe the psychologist wants them to keep coming back. And what's really needed is that hardcore pointing the finger and calling them out, this, that, and that's what I think things like the S training and landmark. I don't know if you know about some of that.
Of course,
and it was
yeah.
almost, some people didn't like it because people were called out and made to feel bad. But that's kind of getting to the truth in quite a abrupt way. But it had amazing, rapid results for people. In a business or in a sports environment, how would you start to encourage, if you left 5 guys in a room or 5 girls in a room or whatever, how does one start to speak the truth to one another?
I'll answer a few of these things. You're hitting on some really powerful stuff. Truth in love. Truth in love. So it takes courage to speak truth. It is way easier to tell people what they want to hear. And I talk a lot about this. And unfortunately, there's always a group that are naturally assholes that take that as permission to continue to be assholes, which isn't what I'm saying. Right? I tend to believe the best leaders are the reluctant ones. The guys that we probably need running our countries are the ones that don't want to fucking run the country. I also think the ones that are speaking truth are the ones that are genuinely afraid to hurt people or don't want to hurt people, but have the courage to say and do what is necessary. Not the guy who gets off on saying shit that hurts people. So it's always like, it's a problem with content. It's like you're speaking to the masses. There are people who are going to enable their own behaviors through it. But truth in love, being honest, being authentic about what you're experiencing, what you're saying, full well knowing just because you're experiencing it or feeling it doesn't make it true. That's one of the ways we fuck this up, is we think that our experience and our emotions are indications of truth. And a quick story to hit this home for those who maybe struggle with this idea that our experience and our emotions aren't necessarily an indication of truth. I tell it to my guys all the time. One of my business partners, I say it this way. I said, if we were all in this room together in the middle of this discussion, and Sandra, who's one of my business partners, ran into the room and said, we're on the 8th floor of our building. And if she came in and said, there's a bomb in the building, we got to get out. This building's going to blow up. Well, depending on who you are, you would respond to that information differently. Some people would run over people to get out of the room. Some people would carry people on their backs to get out of the room. Some people would be saying, man, I wish I would have asked for that girl's number or that guy's number. Man, I wish I would have got laid one last time. Man, I wish there's all of these stories going through their head, and they're having these very real experiences based on this information. Everybody gets out of the building one way or the other. You're sitting in the parking lot waiting for the building to blow up. And Sandra comes up behind us and starts laughing her ass off. And she thinks this shit's just hilarious. Oh, she got everyone. This was so funny. Well, was your experience real? Yeah. Fuck yes, it was real. Your life going before your eyes, thinking about what could go wrong. Oh my God, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I call my mom? The experience is all real. It just happens to be based on a fucking lie. And this is a lot of the human experience. We perceive that our emotions indicate truth and that our perception of life is reality. Now, it is our reality, and that's empowering in and of itself once you realize that's design, and you can design that the way you want. It's just not a reflection of the outer objective world, but of your inner world. Okay, so that shows up a lot in how we show up in conversation. If therapists, and going back to therapy real quick, and there are fantastic therapists. I've got dear friends that are great at what they do. But here's the issue with therapy, and here's my general rule. If you're going to a therapist for a year and you're still talking about the same shit, it's time to either get a new therapist or get real about the fact that you don't want to fucking change. Right? And are there exceptions? Yes. There's exceptions to fucking everything. But as a general rule, that's it. If your therapist is afraid to tell you the truth. Now, here's the other thing. If you're going to a therapist and the pervasive message you're getting is it's not your fault, you're talking to the wrong fucking therapist. Are there exceptions to that? Yes. Is it possible that you were a victim in a moment? Yes. But if you're still in victimhood, the messaging got lost somewhere along the way. Yes, you very well could be a victim of something. Yes. If you're hanging out in victimhood years, decades later, it's time to recognize that's part of your identity and you are fucking stuck. And if your therapist wants to keep telling you it's not your fault, it's because you keep paying them to hear that message because it makes you fucking feel good in the moment, but it isn't changing your life. So there we go.
Well said.
So authenticity and honesty is an important part to this whole thing and getting real and that means it's going to be messy. You may say some shit that's how you think that may not be real. But if we can create frameworks to have those conversations, we really then can begin to change lives. So that goes back to what I was saying to your question earlier. And again, I would use the 4 agreements, and really he added a 5th agreement, which I thought was pretty potent there at the end. But the 4 agreements is the framework I would use for authenticity, transparency, and showing up in real relationship, which is be impeccable with your word, be true about what you're saying. And what I would say there is, commit to speaking honestly while humbly acknowledging it may not be truth. Right? Commit to speaking honestly while humbly acknowledging it may not be truth. But at least it's honest, meaning it's genuinely what you think. Knowing just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. But that's where we start. That's being impeccable with the word. Not taking things personal means you're not going to be sensitive in a way that clouds your ability to see something objectively to the degree in which we can, and you're not emotionally mitigating the experience because of your internal story. And that's very often people tune out because they're being challenged in a way that makes it personal because their identity is being challenged, and now they can no longer hear the truth because they are too interested in protecting their identity, their story about self and other. Fucked. Number 3, don't make assumptions. How much pain in this world is created? Man, do I see it on social media, that people assume they know what someone else is thinking or saying, and they speak for them. Not asking questions. I can generally tell the level of consciousness in people that I'm engaging with on social media by whether or not they make a statement as a comment or whether they ask a clarifying question. Somebody who is seeking to understand or is perceiving at higher levels of consciousness generally will ask questions around content. They will not make statements. Statements are an indication, sometimes very arrogant indication, that you think you understand what the person is saying, and then judging that. Don't make assumptions. Ask clarifying questions. Seek to understand, especially if somebody said is super challenging to you and it's somebody that you either like or don't like. Now, I'll have people, it doesn't happen very often, but I'll have people DM me and go, hey, I used to follow you until I saw who you followed. And I don't have time to spend a whole lot of time in discourse with those people, but just as a general statement, I follow lots of people from like Meta at one point was trying to figure out what my political leanings were, and it literally came back like, we don't fucking know, because you're not really gonna catch it from my social media following, because I want and seek out lots of different perspectives on things, and I'm not a political party guy. I'm a truth guy, and neither fucking party in the United States is by any shot got the monopoly on truth. So anyway, so don't make assumptions. And the last one is do your best. Always do your best. Now, your best may look different depending on whether you've eaten or not, whether or not you've got enough sleep or not, whether you're sick or not. But pursue excellence. Pursue excellence in everything you do, whatever you do. And then the last one he added much later, but I really like, which is listen, but question everything. Seek to understand, but question everything. And I say this to my students all the time. Don't believe a fucking word I'm saying because I'm saying it. I have failed you long term if the only reason you believe something is because I believe it. My goal as a teacher is that somebody understands truth for truth's sake, not because of me. Now, as being a good coach, being a good teacher, you may need to allow a certain level of grace to say, hey, I don't quite understand this yet, but I trust you, so I'll start to apply it and see how it works out. But over time, if you have not integrated that truth as an individual, there's still more work to do. I would not, over the long haul, point to somebody else as the reason why you believe something. Well, what's a really easy, obvious example of that? Nobody is walking around, to my knowledge, saying the only reason they believe 2 + 2 = 4 is because their fucking kindergarten or first grade teacher taught them. Right? They'll be like, Mrs. Olds taught me that 2 + 2 = 4. Well, why do you believe 2 + 2 = 4? Because my second grade, first grade kindergarten teacher told me. We would laugh. We think that's silly.
It goes to your point earlier about that outward self-awareness and how people are showing up in the world and what they're seeing, saying, believing.
Yes.
Could be their own conditioned psychology playing out. And once we understand that, what's behind everything, people can create their own beliefs and give meanings to things and say things and do things. And those things are malleable, and so once we look at the world through that framework, it gives us that ability to kind of be more objective about everything that we're seeing and hearing from everyone. And yeah, you might come across someone that's giving you some advice and guidance and actually like, yeah, I do like that. I do like that, where that's coming from. My internal filter is aligned with that person. It's something I talk about quite a lot, and honing that skill or that art of being able to better disseminate who to take advice from and who to ignore. It's a really hard skill in life, because one has to have a real filter. Who's saying it? Why are they saying it? What do they want for me? What career are they in? What ambitions? What values do they have compared to me? And I think one can really hone a lot from getting better at that skill. I mean, it can go to everything in life, right? It can be like trying to break down marketing when someone's trying to sell something to you. It's like, oh, hang on, I can see what's going on here. And one can hold up a filter to any advice that people are being given. But Seb, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you about those workshops like the S training and Landmark, where sort of workshops and seminars which are designed to give people that quite sort of kick up the arse, of want a better phrase, to call people out in a slightly harsher way rather than the softer, more gentle modalities.
I would say we very often sell people what they want, and if we're great at what we do, we give them what they need. So sometimes that's the approach that's going to work. I will say, as a principle, if we react to error, we likely are going to cause more error. Or we could say, if you're really good at one tool, it may be at the cost of the others. And a craftsman knows how to use the right tool for the right job. Sometimes radical truth that can be hard to hear and hurtful in some cases may be the right approach. But
For the
I would
right
be
person at the right time.
right. I would be hard pressed to say that that is always the approach you should take. I would speak honestly and authentically at all times, but reach people in the way that is going to be most effective for them. And that is how I try to show up in my relationship to other, is to show up and to to reach them more than use the tool that I like to use the most. And so again, he who's good with a hammer sees everything as a nail. If you're really good at or have a predisposition towards a particular style, you will inevitably use that. It just also means that there are likely going to be times when you misapply that. So, but I have, including one of my brothers, went through Landmark and had a lot of positive things to say about it overall. I've got a dear friend in the PE world who went through Landmark and it changed her life. So I think there's a lot of positive things coming out of that. We just want to make sure we're not reacting to error, right? And thus creating more error unconsciously. So meaning we don't show up in a world in which we perceive that nobody speaks the truth and nobody's being authentic and real. And so we see that as an error. And in response to that error, we show up very directly, very painfully truthful, and maybe we could say authentic to the way we think we should be. Generally, when you respond to error, you create more error. And we see this throughout society and we see it throughout history. It's best to learn, to understand, and then become a craftsman. Use the right tool for the right situation. And sometimes that's love and compassion in a way that there's nothing to say, only to be with someone. Sometimes that means not judging what somebody is saying at all because they're beating themselves up so bad for what they're thinking and feeling. They don't need anyone else to do it. They just need space to air it so they can process on their own. And that to me is what being a good coach is, which is why I have frameworks that I coach from, but I show up present with the person in front of me, not with an agenda. And I think good coaches solve for themselves by removing themselves from the equation as much as they possibly can.
I think that's really interesting, and I've seen a lot of different types of coaches operate, and as you said, some of the best ones in the world, they've got an armory and they bring out whatever they need at that moment. And if it's the hard knock, that might be required. If it's the gentle, or sometimes, like you said, you have to let that person flow through the passage of time and life has a way of popping up and making people realize things for themselves. It's like that fourth or fifth relationship that's broken down. Oh, maybe it's not them, it's me. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. It has to kind of happen in the right way.
Yeah, and I would say there is a place to hear that it isn't your fault, right? Like that's a tool in the tool belt that a discerning teacher, master, coach would know there is a time and place for that message.
I know what you're saying, but I think more specifically as well, I think where it's often very true is when people are personalizing things that might have happened to them in their past to make them feel a certain way about themselves that have implications on their self-worth and their self-belief about themselves. Maybe teachers, maybe parents, maybe friends, whatever. And it goes to what you were talking about earlier. It's that outward self-awareness, knowing that person, didn't do it to you. It was their own messed up conditioning and psychology playing out, and you were the vassal that got in their way.
100%. Well, yes. And so from a therapy standpoint, I was picking on therapists earlier. It's usually where you get stuck is you literally get stuck there. Great. It's not my fault, but there's nowhere to go from there. And so now a year later, you're still having your therapist tell you it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And now you're just now you're explaining why you show up in the world the way you do as a result of something that wasn't your fault. When truth, when it washes over you, releases the responsibility of the action so that you now can recognize your responsibility of response, your responsibility in that. So that's where then you can release the wound or what has happened to you. Where people get stuck, and it happens a lot in therapy because they feel deeply empowered to be told, this isn't my fault that I'm this way. Well, no. It wasn't your fault that happened to you. You were absolutely fucking responsible for how you respond to what happened to you. And those are not the same thing. But again, being human, loves to like point outward. And that's, again, where do we need a self-awareness? Any area of our life where we continue to get an unintended negative consequence or positive consequence for that matter, we likely lack self-awareness. And as long as our story is the problem is out there, we are 100% missing it. Now, bad things happen to people. Yes, you're still responsible for how you handle and show up in the world based on those things. This is the work. This is the way.
I think it's a great place to wrap up, Seb. Thank you.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, my friend. Keep in touch.
Yeah, 100%. I'd really like that. Thank you, Sebastian. If you enjoyed the episode, please share the love and give us a cheeky follow, rating, like, or review. It really does make a massive difference. Don't be shy either to share any of your favorites on social media. This is a truly mission-driven project with the aim of helping to motivate, inspire, and give hope to as many people as possible that change, a better life, a new dawn is all possible. I genuinely love hearing from you and actively try to constantly improve things and bring guests on to address any specific themes. As always, you'll find resources and links from the episode in the show notes. You can follow me on all social media platforms as well as YouTube. And don't forget to check out my website, charleylaw.com. Until next time.